survival. We see them as brutes, hunched over, club in hand, a caricature of a caveman. That's the image of a Neanderthal we all know. But it's wrong. It's a distortion based on the first skeleton they found, an old male stooped with arthritis. The reality was so much more complex, so much more human, and to understand that humanity, you have to look at their children. How did they raise them? How does a small, vulnerable Neanderthal baby grow up in the harsh world of the Ice Age? The answer isn't a simple list of facts, it's a story pieced together from fragments. A tooth here, a broken bone there, a footprint left in the mud of a cave floor. It's a story about family, community, and survival. Let's start before the beginning. With pregnancy, a Neanderthal woman's body was a fortress. She was shorter and stockier than us. Her bones were thicker, her muscles were powerful, she was built for a hard life in a cold climate. But pregnancy would have been just as demanding, just as dangerous as it has always been. Her diet would have been crucial. She needed fat and protein not just for herself, but for the growing life inside her. This wasn't a solo effort. Her group, her family would have had to provide for her. Ensuring she got the best cuts of meat, the safest place by the fire, her survival was the group's survival. And then came the birth. We have to imagine this part. There are no written records. But we can make some good guesses. A birth in a cold, damp cave or a temporary shelter would be a risky event. Infection was a constant threat. Complications could be a death sentence. It's almost certain she wouldn't have been alone. She would have had help. Her mother, her sister, another experienced woman from the group. A midwife of sorts. Someone to hold her hand, to offer comfort, to know what to do. The idea of a lone Neanderthal woman giving birth behind a rock is a myth. They were social creatures. Major life events, like birth and death, were community affairs. When the baby was born, it was just as helpless as a modern human baby. Maybe even more so. For a long time, scientists thought Neanderthal brains grew faster than ours, meaning their childhoods were shorter. But newer evidence suggests their brain growth was actually very similar to ours. This means they had a long, slow childhood, a long period of dependency, and that has huge implications for how they were raised. A long childhood means a long time for learning, and a Neanderthal child had a lot to learn. The first year or two would have been a period of intense bonding. A Neanderthal mother likely carried her infant constantly. We don't have fossilized baby slings, of course. Animal hides and plant fibers don't last for 50,000 years. But it's the only thing that makes sense. A baby put down on the cold cave floor would be vulnerable to predators, to the cold, to being trampled. Constant physical contact would have been essential for warmth and safety. You can picture it. A baby tucked into a fur sling, listening to the rhythm of its mother's heartbeat as she foraged for plants or worked on a hide. We know a bit about breastfeeding too. Scientists can look at the chemical composition of teeth. Tiny layers get laid down as a tooth grows, a bit like tree rings. By analyzing the levels of elements like barium in these layers, they can tell when a child was drinking milk and when they were weaned onto solid food. The evidence suggests Neanderthal children were breastfed for around 2 years. This is similar to many modern human hunter-gatherer societies. It provided vital nutrition, boosted the immune system, and strengthened the bond between mother and child. As the infant grew into a toddler, its world would expand from its mother's arms to the area just around the fire, the heart of the home. This was the safe zone. Here, the child would start to learn the basics of life. They would watch, they would listen, they would imitate. Everything was a lesson. A child would see its father or uncle knapping flint, the sharp crack of one stone against another, the careful practice movements, the creation of a sharp edge from a dull rock. Maybe the child would pick up 2 rocks and try it themselves. Archaeologists sometimes find small, crudely made stone tools at Neanderthal sites. Some think these might be the practice attempts of children learning the most important skill of their people. It wasn't a formal lesson with a teacher and a blackboard. It was learning by doing, by being present. A father wouldn't sit his son down and say, "Today we will learn to make a hand axe." He would just make the axe, and the son would watch, his young brain absorbing every detail. The same was true for food. A young child would follow its mother and the other women as they foraged. They would learn which plants were good to eat and which were poison, which roots to dig up, which berries were ripe. They would learn the landscape. This rock formation means you are close to the good mushrooms. This bend in the river is where the edible reeds grow. This knowledge wasn't abstract. It was the difference between a full belly and starvation. It was a mental map of survival passed down from one generation to the next, not through writing, but through shared experience. And what about play? Did Neanderthal children play? Of course they did. Play is not a luxury. It's a fundamental part of how young mammals learn. It's how they develop physical skills, practice social interactions, and make sense of the world. We don't have fossilized toys, for the most part. But we can imagine the games. Chasing each other around the campsite, throwing stones at a target to improve their aim. Playing with animal bones. A stick could be a spear. A smooth stone could be a doll. At a site in France, archaeologists found a collection of small, fossilized sea urchins and shells. They were not tools, they had no practical purpose, but they had been brought there from a distance. Maybe a child collected them because they were interesting, because they were beautiful. A prehistoric rock collection. It's a small clue, but it hints at a sense of curiosity, of wonder. It hints at a mind that wasn't just focused on survival, but could also appreciate the small, interesting things in the world. Play was also about learning social rules. Who is the leader? How do you share? How do you resolve conflicts? These games were practice for the complex social life of the group. Cooperation was everything for Neanderthals. A lone Neanderthal wouldn't last long. They had to hunt together, defend each other, and care for each other. These lessons started in childhood, in the rough and tumble of play. Life was not all play, however. The world of a Neanderthal child was filled with danger. There were cave bears, lions, and hyenas. There was the ever-present threat of a sudden snowstorm or a flash flood. Children had to learn to be vigilant. They had to learn the sound of a predator in the distance. They had to know where to run, where to hide. They probably saw death up close. An unsuccessful hunt. An illness that swept through the group. A fall from a cliff. And childhood mortality was likely very high. Many children probably didn't make it to their 5th birthday. We see this harsh reality in their bones. The skeletons of Neanderthal children sometimes show signs of stress. The lines on their bones, called Harris lines, can indicate periods of malnutrition or severe illness when growth stopped for a while. Their teeth also tell a story. Imperfections in the enamel, called enamel hypoplasia, show periods of stress during development. These children lived lives that were physically demanding, and their bodies recorded the struggle. But their bones also tell another story, a story of care. At several sites, we have found the remains of children who had serious injuries or congenital defects, yet they lived for years. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, they found the skeleton of a Neanderthal who had suffered a crushing blow to the head as a child. It would have blinded him in one eye and likely damaged his brain. He also had a withered arm and walked with a limp. Yet he lived to be an old man for a Neanderthal. He could not have survived on his own. He couldn't hunt effectively. He couldn't defend himself properly. The only way he survived was because his group cared for him. They fed him. They protected him. This wasn't a world of survival of the fittest in the brutal individualistic sense. It was a world of survival of the group. We see this care extended to children too. In Syria, at a site called Dederiye Cave, archaeologists found the carefully buried skeleton of a Neanderthal toddler, about 2 years old. The body had been placed in a shallow pit lying on its back with its arms outstretched and legs bent. A flint tool was found near its head, and a piece of limestone was placed on its chest. This was not a random disposal of a body. This was a deliberate burial. It suggests grief. It suggests love. It suggests that this small child was important to its people, and its loss was a source of sorrow. They took the time and effort to give it a proper farewell. This is a profoundly human act. As a Neanderthal child grew into adolescence, the training would become more serious. The transition from childhood to adulthood was likely much faster than it is for us. A teenager was already a contributing member of the group. Boys would start to join the hunts. Not the big, dangerous hunts for woolly mammoths or rhinos at first, but they would learn to track. They would hunt smaller game, they would learn how to work as a team, how to anticipate the movements of an animal, how to be brave in the face of danger. A successful hunt was a rite of passage. Girls would be mastering the skills of foraging, processing hides, and caring for the younger children. They would be learning the medicinal properties of plants. They would be strengthening the social bonds that held the group together. These weren't lesser roles. They were just as crucial for survival as hunting. Without the plants, hides, and social cohesion the women provided, the hunter's meat would be useless. Who was in charge of all this teaching? It wasn't just the mother and father. Neanderthals likely practiced what we now call alloparenting. That means other parenting. The entire group helped raise the children. Uncles, aunts, grandparents, older siblings, and even unrelated friends all played a role. An older, experienced grandmother might have been the primary caregiver for a group of toddlers while their mothers were out foraging. An uncle might have taken a group of boys on their first rabbit hunt. This system had huge advantages. It spread the burden of childcare, freeing up the parents to focus on other vital tasks. It also created a tight-knit community. A child grew up feeling a sense of belonging not just to a nuclear family, but to a whole clan. And if the child's parents died, which was a common occurrence, there was a whole network of people ready to step in and care for them. The orphan was not cast out, they were absorbed into the larger family. This social safety net was one of their greatest strengths. We need to picture the environment these children grew up in. It wasn't a static landscape. It was the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, a world of dramatic climate shifts. Sometimes it was intensely cold, with glaciers grinding down from the north. At other times, it was warmer, more like today. A Neanderthal child had to learn to adapt. They learned to read the seasons, they learned where to find shelter in a blizzard, they learned how to follow the migrating herds of reindeer or bison. Their entire education was about their environment. This was a sensory world, the smell of the pine forest, the sound of a wolf howling at night, the feel of cold wind on your face, the taste of roasted mammoth fat. A child's senses would have been sharp, honed by necessity. They would have known the world in a way we can barely imagine, not through books or screens, but through direct, unmediated experience. So how was a Neanderthal childhood different from that of the modern humans, the Homo sapiens, who were starting to arrive in their lands? We were a different species, though closely related. We could even interbreed. But there were subtle differences. Neanderthals matured a bit faster physically. Their bodies were built for power and endurance in the cold. We were built for efficiency and long-distance running. Perhaps our childhoods were slightly longer. That extra time might have allowed for more complex social learning, for the development of more sophisticated language, and for the creation of more complex symbolic thought, like art. This is still debated. But the competition between our two groups would have put pressure on how children were raised. Maybe our ability to form larger social networks, to pass on information more efficiently, gave our children an edge. But we shouldn't see Neanderthals as a failure. They were a stunning evolutionary success. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years through multiple ice ages. They were intelligent, adaptable, and socially complex. And the foundation of that success was how they raised their children. They raised them in a community, they taught them through observation and practice. They protected them from a dangerous world, but also prepared them for it. They cared for their sick and injured. They mourned their dead. They gave their children the skills and the social support they needed to survive. When we look at the evidence, the image of the brutish caveman fades away. It's replaced by something far more compelling. A Neanderthal mother comforting a crying baby. A father showing his son how to sharpen a stone. A group of children laughing as they play a game. An old woman telling stories by the fire. Their world is gone. They vanished around 40,000 years ago, for reasons we still don't fully understand. Maybe it was climate change, maybe it was competition with us, maybe it was a combination of many factors. But they didn't disappear completely. A little bit of their DNA lives on in most humans today outside of Africa. They are a part of our story. Thinking about how they raised their children forces us to confront our own ideas about what it means to be human. It reminds us that family, community, teaching, and love are not modern inventions. They are ancient survival strategies. They are the threads that connect us to our deepest past. The life of a Neanderthal child was likely short, hard, and full of risk, but it was also a life. A life filled with learning, with connection, and with the care of a family that did everything it could to see them grow up. And that is a story worth telling.